What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another episode of Kicking It with Zain, also known as the Belt Guy. It's me. Welcome back to another episode. Today we have a very special guest, a unique guest in the Giants world, in the Giants community, if you will. So let's get Matt on board, better known as BigBlueVCR on Twitter. All those lovely clips you see, old school, new school, in the middle, all that. That's kind of his platform, how he goes in that direction, but I'm gonna let him speak on who he is, how he got here, and how he started this whole thing. So let's go ahead and bring Matt to the table. How's it going, Matt?
Doing great, Zain. How are you doing?
Good, man. Appreciate you being here. Glad you're here, and very, very interested in your story. But before we get into your story, definitely want to shout out Darius for being here, great supporter in the social world. Chris is also here, also a great supporter. Appreciate everyone being here. So let's get into you now that I actually know your name. Because for me, and for everybody else, it's probably just Big Blue VCR because that's what we have to go off of. Or otherwise, like you said, you have your Bill Parcells photo.
Yep.
So give me the concept behind Big Blue VCR. Let's just get right into how this specific platform started with you, and then we'll get into the root of and how to get here. But as far as Big Blue VCR, how did you come up with the name? Obviously, VCRs are not trendy at all today, right? We're living in a different age. You had them in your time. I had them in my time, so I know what it is. But how did Big Blue VCR become a thing for you?
Sure. Yeah. I age myself immediately the second that you see this Twitter handle. The sort of the genesis of where the name came from was almost completely by accident, and I kind of almost have to like give you a little bit more context around like how this came to be, and what kind of which kind of like created this whole thing, persona,
Sure.
or whatever you want to call it. I basically grew up a Giant fan in the 80s. And when the Giants were really started to be on, like when LT came and things turned around there in the early 80s, I started watching more and more of the games. And then once you got to games, especially the Monday Night Football games in the mid 80s, like, 84, 85, 86, when I was around 10, 11 years old, I couldn't stay up to watch the games because they started at 9 o'clock.
Yep.
So what I would do is I'd watch, maybe the first quarter, like, the half hour in, and then I had to go to bed to get up to school the next day. And I just taped the games, and I would wake up the next day and watch them and, see what happened. So it first started as like necessity that, I wanted to see, of course, the next morning I'd see who won, what happened, but I wanted to go back to watch it myself. So it started first just with the Monday Night Football games, recording these games. And then as I moved along in the 80s, I just started recording all the games. And for a while, I would tape over the losses because I didn't want to keep those.
That's fair.
But yeah, because I don't want to go back and see that again. But
Sure.
I would record the games, and you have to remember, this is pre-internet. This was even pre like WFAN being around. WFAN
Right.
came out later, so I was starved as as a teenager or whatever for just Giant content. So I would go back and watch these tapes. So I just collected a whole bunch of tapes. I went up to I grew up in Bergen County and in New Jersey, and I went up to college at Boston College. And when I was there, the Patriots were horrible. Like I was there first with when Dick McPherson was the coach in '92 before Parcells got there, and the Patriots were never on. But then Parcells came in '93, and then suddenly the Patriots were like on TV because they were selling out games. They hadn't done it before, so I couldn't really see the Giant games. The internet was super infancy. There was, like you could go to a sports bar or something like that, but my parents would tape the games for me and mail them out to Boston, and then I would watch them during the week. And over time, I just collected this like group of tapes, all these old VCR tapes of the Giant games, and they sat in my room, for years, when I moved out and everything. And then one day, my parents reached out to me like, "Hey, look, like we're cleaning out the house over here, so we have all these VCR tapes. We're going to throw them out." And I said, "Don't do that." I was like, "Let me just come get them." So I went and got the tapes out. I found an old VCR. And if you remember in 2011, there was actually a lockout for the NFL.
Right.
So there was no news. There was nothing going on. So what I did was I got a computer program, and then I converted all these VCR tapes. First, I was going to put them on DVDs. I was like, I kind of realized DVDs were already going out. So I converted them to a digital file and basically put them all on hard drives and everything. And I now had all this content. I had all this stuff. And there's a one of the old Giant fan websites called Big Blue Interactive, which I'm sure you've seen before.
Yep.
I post there, for years. I posted there as Matt and SGS, and I know Eric Kennedy, and I know those guys over at the.
They banned me from that site.
Oh, did you? Ah, sorry to hear that. Like, yeah,
I
every
got
now and
banned. I put up a post once referencing something I saw on YouTube, and after that post, they deleted my account. I was like, I wonder what I posted that they didn't like.
Oh, really? Wow,
Yeah,
that's
so,
hardcore. Yeah, something I know they had moderators there doing that stuff, but yeah, I didn't know
yeah.
that.
Maybe I posted something they didn't like.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I took a clip of, I think it was um, Pepper Johnson talking about Leonard Williams. And I thought it was a
really?
really interesting clip. So I played it, or I put it on there. I referenced it at least, on the website. Be like,
Mhm.
here, I saw this. I thought this was pretty cool. Because that's usually how most of them go. You have a conversation.
Oh yeah.
Big Blue Interactive is like Giants, but like it's like Reddit for Giants fans, more or less, is the
It
way I
is.
think about it.
Oh yeah,
Um,
the message board hasn't changed in
yeah,
20 years, and so
exactly.
so it's like
So,
I've been on there since the early days.
sure.
When it was the Big Blue homepage before that, then it changed to
Yeah.
the interactive.
So I posted that clip, and that was it. They deleted it. I was like, well, I mean,
Wow, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what
that's how that falls. But
that's
yeah, I like
hardcore.
Big Blue Interactive, but I'm assuming because they deleted my email's probably blocked, so I didn't even bother doing another one. I was like, that's fine.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. I could ask Eric on your behalf and see what happened if you want back in.
Yeah,
But
sure. I'd be
but
curious.
what I did was, again, I had I had all these tapes, and I was like kind of bored one day, and then I actually created a blog at the time, old blogger setup, and I was doing a deep review of like all these, old games. Where I would go back, I would cut them up, I would cut up like the video, the little clips, and I put them on YouTube and stuff like that. And I reached out to Eric and I said, hey, I was like, would you mind if I just link to the blog and I just like do like, an old game every couple of weeks to talk through in the off season? And people would go through and read all the stuff. And when I was trying to come up with the blog name, I was like, all right, what am I going to do? I'm like, okay, well, you have the Big Blue Giants. I got a VCR. Then there, Big Blue VCR. So like I said, I wish there was like a lot more like market research or something like that. But it was kind of like just that quick and easy that I'm like, okay, well, whatever. Like this I guess this
Yeah,
makes
well,
sense.
it might be quick and easy, but if you go back to your origin, it literally starts as you as a child, or that VCR part doesn't even come into play, right? It literally connects through your lifetime till you get to that point, and all that kind of just sits with you at that point. So that's actually pretty cool. It is a little bit of an origin story there.
Oh yeah. It goes all the way back, and then I created a YouTube. I mean, I not YouTube. I created a Twitter account like around 2015 or so, and it was mostly just to follow Giant news. I didn't really post. I wasn't really very active. Every now and then I'd chime in with something, but I was not active at all. I had I guess a viral moment the first time was the Daniel Jones draft.
Okay.
And what happened was I go to the draft party every year. I have season tickets. Season tickets have been in my family since I'm one of those like stories of like since like
Sure. Like
Yankee
your
Stadium in the
grandfathers. Yeah,
1950s and
gotcha.
passing
Runs in your
down.
family.
It runs in the family. So we're a true Giants family, and I would go to the draft party every year. And I normally meet a couple friends of mine at the draft each year. And in 2019 for that draft, I went there, but they were locked up back at work. They were late. So I
Sure.
told them I'm going to record the 6th pick in the draft and get a video for you guys. Then I'll see you. And then I met up with them later when like the 17th pick came around, which turned out to be, Dexter Lawrence. But
Sure.
there was a guy I was sitting with, I was waiting for my friends to come, and then like the pick comes along. And at the time, if you remember, the rumors were that like, okay, Daniel Jones is going to be the guy, but he's probably going to be the guy at 17, or maybe they, trade up at 17, but at the 6th pick, they're going to go somewhere else. Like that kind of was like the vibe. And I wanted defense at the time because I had assumed, and I thought Daniel Jones was going to be there later. So what I said to the guy I was with was, it was Josh Allen, not
Yep.
quarterback Josh Allen, pass rusher
Yep.
Josh Allen.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah. I'm like,
Jags.
yep. I'm like, I wanted Josh Allen to be the pick, and I was like, I really hope they don't reach for Jones here. I'm okay getting him later, but I hope they don't reach. So I start recording the thing. Goodell says, Daniel Jones, and I kind of let out, and I went like, oh no, and I said that, and then I'm recording. You see people like all making noises and stuff in the crowd.
Sure.
And once I recorded it, at first I sent it over to my friends who were coming. I'm like, oh, here's what happened. And then for the first time, really, I tweeted the thing out to the Big Blue Interactive site and to the Giant Insider site also. Those guys, the Giant Insider Twitter account. And I was like, here's what happened for the pick. Once I sent that, I think it was the Big Blue Interactive Twitter account retweeted it, and they had a bunch of beat reporters, national beat reporters that follow them. They took that, they retweeted it, and the thing went haywire, and it got like 1 million views in like a couple hours because it got picked up on ESPN and all this other stuff like that. So all of a sudden, like, I honestly felt terrible after it went viral because I'm like, this is Daniel Jones' biggest moment of his life. Like he was a walk-on at Duke. He worked his way up to this, and here's some jerk on Twitter, like who isn't close to the athlete he is, like, creating this whole stir.
Sure.
So I actually sent an apology in the tweet, and then I actually found the old video of Phil Simms when he was drafted, where the fans booed him. And I said, I was like to Daniel Jones, I'm like, I hope that you can look back and use this as motivation and realize that like fans don't know what they're talking about all the time. I was like, we're Giant fans, we're rooting for you. So that was like it. I kind of was dormant in 2019 after that. 2020, once COVID hit, we're all home, working from home.
Yep.
And I'm bored out of my mind sitting here. Nothing is going on, but I'm now home and I have access now to all of these videos that I have, these games that I have converted and then over time traded with other people. So I'm like, yeah, what if I just start cutting this stuff up and just start posting it on Twitter? Why not? Like nothing, there's no other sports, nothing else is going on in the world. So I start doing that, and then it starts building and catching on, and more people are seeing it, and former players are seeing it, and beat reporters are seeing it, and the Giants organization seeing it. And then over time, it just kind of kept going. And I'm like, well, what can I do with this? And that's when I started doing old game reviews and finding players' birthdays and stuff. So really, it was just kind of like it built from that point after COVID when we were home. And then I just kind of like created this thing, and it's gotten so much engagement and people enjoy it that it's kind of kept going. So that's the long-winded genesis of BigBlueVCR, but that's kind of how it started. So it was extremely just organic.
But that was, like I said, that's an amazing origin story. You're literally taking a piece of your childhood path and you've turned it into something on the side you're doing, which again is very enjoyable. I was saying to you earlier, I think you're the only person doing what you're doing. Everyone posts clips, everyone posts videos, everyone posts some level of reaction, but no one is consistently doing an intentionally purposed parameter of these clips or reviews like you are. Very niche for what you're doing. So, I mean, like I said, I think you're the only one doing it, and it's great. People love it. So based off of that, Darius brings up a question. I want to know how many Giants legends he's met, he being Matt. I retweet so many of Matt's tweets, and I see actual Giants players retweeting and commenting on them some too. So has this led to any interactions with players previously, or I said currently, based off of it? Because you've also obviously been a season ticket holder, like you said, since forever. So there's probably been some interaction on that point, just going forever. Has there anything interaction-wise that's led directly from your Big Blue VCR venture?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a couple things. There's my pre-Big Blue VCR life, and then the current one that I have where I've interacted with players. And again, like being a season ticket holder, growing up in Bergen County, I grew up in Oradell, and that's where Bill Parcells went to my high school. That's sort of like the joke I even have on my little Twitter blurb over there, where I say like went to Dwayne Parcells High School because his first name is Dwayne. He goes by Bill. So like where I live was Giants country. I knew Bill Parcells' brother. His brother, Doug Parcells. They actually named a field after him over in Oradell. It's called the Doug Parcells Athletic Complex, the DPAC. That's over in Oradell. And he was the head of Oradell Recreation. And, I knew him for years. So, like, there's a lot of interaction just from that, of meeting players back in the 80s when Parcells would come to Riverdale. When I was there, Greg Toll, Coach Toll, who's, like famous football coach in North Jersey, who he was there for Bosco and other places. Yep. He was the coach of Riverdale when I was there, and Parcells used to come to the Riverdale practices and kind of give pointers because like they knew each other from the town, and they bring players and stuff. And I actually got to know Byron Hunt. Byron Hunt was the backup linebacker in the 80s. And did a little bit of work with him actually in the late 90s where he was trying to set up like websites and stuff. And I was helping him out, just do some of those things just through these connections. And from Byron, I met like a bunch of, players like, I met like, Stephen Baker.
Touchdown maker, Stephen Baker.
Yeah. Baker. there's a old running back for the Giants in the '80s, Billy Taylor, who I met through him. So there's kind of like that was more just kind of like just catching up to other people and meeting them that way.
Sure.
After Big Blue VCR, like the X players love it, and I have a whole bunch of X players, follow like Banks and Tiki and OC and Kerry Collins and Mark Collins and
nice.
O'Hara, Soybert, Bardo. It's like all of them follow me. And one of the things that happens is like I've actually one thing is they do interact in the posts that I send, where they will literally comment on something that I've put in there. And I love the insight that they talk about, where they'll be like, on this specific play I was doing this and I was looking at that. Like I showed a highlight last year of OC getting 2 sacks against Walter Jones of Seattle, and Walter Jones to that point hadn't allowed a sack in 2 years, and he got 2 like in the first half against him. And OC comment tweeted on it or whatever, retweeted with comment where he said that before that game, he was talking to the Giants about a contract. And the Giants said to him, let's see how you measure up, because this guy's the best. And if you do well against him, we can then take our contract, talks further. After the 2 sacks, OC said the Giants had a contract waiting for him Monday morning, coming back from Seattle the next time. So like that type of insight is really cool to get from these guys. I showed the Lambuth special a few years back in Philly when Ron Dixon almost scored in 2001, and I've had both Kerry Collins and Tiki Barber comment on that play, and what they said was 2 things happened on that play. The first thing was Carlos Emmons for Philly dropped back right before the snap, which they weren't expecting, because the pass was supposed to be a timing pass that went to Ike Hilliard. Hilliard was then supposed to lateral to Dixon and go. What Collins told me on the thing was, I told Tiki be ready in case that happens. So Tiki got it instead. Tiki flipped it to Dixon. He's running up the sidelines. And what Tiki said was that one little mess up the timing of the play just enough that if they actually didn't do that and they had it play run properly, he goes, they would have had it blocked all the way and Dixon would have scored. And the Giants would have beat Philly and then gone on to basically compete for the NFC East the next week. Sure. So that's like the interactions I've had just through the accounts. And in other cases, I've had players actually reach out to me, either like in DM and stuff, and they'll say like, hey, love the stuff. Is there any chance you have like XYZ game or something like that for me? Or I remember this one player game, is anything to do? And then I'll, I'm so appreciative of just like, hearing from them and, thanking them for like, putting their livelihood, their bodies on the line just for our entertainment. I'm like, sure. Like, what do you want? And then I'll go like create like a Google share or something like that and drop the game for them. Sweet. And then they'll take it. So I've had a number of those. I've actually had family members of players reach out to me and ask me if they can get like certain games they remember they want to see their dad play over here.
Sure, because you have like historical footage at this point, right? If we're talking about the collection from your childhood to forward, that's a historical collection at this point.
Oh yeah, and the stuff is because it's gotten so much exposure. There's this world of like called like tape traders that are out there that they trade all these like old games from the 70s and 80s and 90s and whatever, and even the 60s. So over time, I've kind of like built relationships with a number of these different groups. Like you mentioned before, like like I'm kind of one of the few people that do something like this.
Yep.
There are other like Twitter accounts that do this for like their own teams that like we've now kind of like have met with each other. There's a guy like Bill's VHS where I just showed the highlight of Rodney Hampton's touchdown in the preseason. He gave me that game. I taped over it. I lost it a while back. So I reached out to him like, hey, do you have this game from 1990, the preseason Giants Bills? And he gave it to me. And then I, cut that thing up. So we all kind of trade. So I have right now, believe it or not, I actually did a count just yesterday because now the new season starts on Friday. I have 815 games that go back to basically the late 60s. So when somebody reaches out to me, like, there's a shot I'll have something from 1977 or whatever it is, or 80, and it'll be like, I'll hear from players, now grown children, their wives or whatever, reach out to me like, hey, I want to do like something special for my, husband. Can you send me this game so I can just show him? And I'm like, yeah, and I'm happy to do it. So it's kind of been great. It's really been overwhelmingly positive. Like Twitter can be a rough place, but when you kind of try to be just genuine and just, like you're just here to talk Giant stuff and share what I can, it's been, it's been great kind of talking to all these different, people. And, get to meet the players as people, not just ones you see on on screen. And
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Giants have a lot of great guys.
And like you said, Twitter is probably an encompass of the best and worst of all worlds kind of put together. You just got to find your lane that you want to be in and just stay in your lane. It's fine. Otherwise, Twitter is Twitter, man. It does
Mm-hmm.
it does what it does.
Yep.
So Tommy wants to know, and you answered kind of part of this, right? So what does Matt's collection of media look like? I know you've obviously digitized it. Is that also preservation based? Are you doing backups? What are you doing to keep your historical content historical?
It's funny you say that. Like, I still have all the primary source content, which is the VCR tapes. Like, I actually, as a I have them in like plastic tubs, believe it or not,
Sure.
that I set aside, that I converted all of them. I have one set on I actually have basically 4 terabyte hard drives. I have one primary. I have a backup that's on there. I actually want to try to back them up again, like on another set. There's too much space that you like put on like a cloud kind of thing, because it'll cost me. I'll have to basically do a Patreon to be able to afford to kind of do that.
Sure.
But funnily enough, there's a big Giant fan who's out in Germany. His name is Sash. And he was actually featured on Giants, the Giants.com, where they kind of went to his like man cave, and he has like all these like game worn jerseys and stuff. He reached out to me a couple of years ago, and he's coming to New York to come to a game. So he wanted to just sort of meet up with me. So I met him, for lunch in the city, and he brought like an external hard drive, and I actually backed everything up that I have and gave it to him too.
Oh, wow.
So I have a redundancy thing, at least through like a couple of years ago, of games in Germany too for him. So if something ever goes wrong, I have it, backed up there. And as far as the quality, like it's kind of hit or miss. Like, in some cases it's my original VCR tape. So if you see like that, and you'll see highlights I'll post where you'll see almost like that VCR, like staticky snow and
that's
stuff.
kind of, I would say for someone like me, that's kind of cool because I can at least relate to the nostalgia aspect. I can't speak for anyone post, right? Because they're looking at something different. But for those of us who have ever seen VCRs or dealt with them in VHSs, it's kind of fun. Like, I enjoy that aspect.
Oh yeah, when you see the tracking and the stuff, it brings you back. Like, I know there are filters that do it and mimic it, but like, this is the real deal. Like, when you see that stuff on my post, like that's it. And a lot of times, what you'll notice, and I've mentioned this before and kind of joked about it, that sometimes usually like if I have like a really bad quality version of a game that you see, if you go back and you check the date of that game, odds are you'll see the Giants will have lost 1 or 2 games before, because it means I taped over it twice to get to that one win.
That's gonna mess with it.
So that's why it looks like really messed up. So yeah, there's always kind of like a backstory to that. And what's weird is, and I talked about this with somebody else a little while back, the quality of the tapes are actually better in the 1980s than they are in the late 90s. Because by the late 90s, they were giving like a pack of VCR tapes for like $5.
Yep.
And the quality was just garbage. The quality was much better in the late 80s. So that's why like some of my tapes from like 98, 99, 2000, it looks really bad, and people are like, what is this? Like, why does it look better? It's because the VHS tapes were just worse. And there's this weird period of time in the early 2000s when TiVo and DVRs came in.
Yep.
That it's tougher to actually find. And I know this for myself because I started, like I got a TiVo. I started TiVoing the games, and then I didn't have them backed up. So a lot of my collection that I have from like 2001, 2, 3, stuff like that are ones where I just reach out to other fans and traded and got them.
Sure. So in this case, again, what's your earliest memory of being a Giants fan? What do you remember as a first memory or a play or something that this is why I fell in love, or besides, just being a family of, what was that first memory for you?
Believe it, my first memory was the first game I went to. And again, like I had my family seats there, but the first game I went to was not in my family seats. And I still remember the game. It was 1980. They played the Denver Broncos. And I went with a friend of mine. It was like, it was a October game, 1:00, Denver. So it's obviously there's no like, rivalry. So that's the game where if someone's bringing the kids, they bring them to a game like that back then. And the Giants weren't good at all back in 1980. And I remember going to the game because when I went with my friend, it may have been like a birthday, whatever thing. I was 6, 7 years old. I got a New York Giants a sweatband there that it's somewhere in my house, and I'm going to tear my house apart to find the thing. But I remember getting that sweatband when I was like, 6, 7 years old, going to the game. I remember because, again, like you're a kid thinking of this stuff. There was Denver had a punt returner. His name was Rick Upchurch, who was a really good punt returner. And Bob Shepard was the PA announcer, everything. And he would say Upchurch. And me and my dumb friends thought he kept saying Upchuck and started laughing about that because we were, immature 6-year-olds. So I still every time I see Rick Upchurch for like old highlights for things, I think of that moment. But my earliest memory really was kind of like that 1980 when Parcells started coming, more into, he came back as a defensive coordinator. And then when he took over as coach in 1983, that was a big deal in my town because, again, I grew up the same town same with his brother.
He's a local legend, right? That's a big deal.
Local legend. So his brother, all that stuff there. So it became everything Giants. And then of course he went 3-12-1. And everyone's like, oh, he's getting fired here. But
sure. That was an era of patience, not like the turnover today.
Oh yeah. Although it's one of those strokes of luck and history or whatever you want to say. And I've kind of talked about this on some other things, but Howard Schnellenberger, who was the head coach of University of Miami when they were winning championships first, when he turned around that program, George Young wanted him to be his head coach. I think he had a history with him. He knew him from something, I think, back in Baltimore. He actually was ready to move on from Parcells after 1 year. Schnellenberger actually was given an offer to go to the USFL to coach the Miami USFL team, which actually never came to be. So because George Young thought he was holding him up for the contract, he's like, you know what, we'll just give Parcells another chance. So if the USFL was not around and Schnellenberger was willing to come, Parcells would have been gone after 1 year because George Young wasn't necessarily sold on him right away. So it's kind of like weird, but yeah, there was definitely more patience back then, but that's where it's kind of like, Parcells thought this is going to be it for him. And he was worried in 1984, that was the wake up call to kind of like have him, institute Sims back at quarterback. He changed his tactics. He turned over the team almost completely. I think he got 20 or 30 new guys to start the 1984 season. And that's what really kickstarted everything for the Giants. But like I said, so my memories growing up really was a kid and really was around Parcells. That's why it's it was that confluence of events where, the Giants are getting good. I'm at that perfect age, or 10, 11 years old, and you start to really get into it. Parcells from my hometown as the coach. It just was it all kind of came together.
Sure. So you're basically in your 4th decade now of being a Giants fan, right? This is now you're in the 4th decade.
Yeah, 4th or 5th, yeah.
Yeah. Which has been the hardest decade as a Giants fan for you? Right?
I think honestly it's been this last one, and I'll tell you the reason for that is different. Obviously the 80s were the glory era. The 90s were annoying because we couldn't kind of lock it down, but they had spurts of being good. You had 93, they made the playoffs and could have, been the number 1 seed. 97, the Fossils' first year was a lot of fun. So there was 2 years down, 1 year up and down. But for me, the worst really was the 2012 on. And in my mind, you can draw a line straight from Hurricane Sandy hitting to the Giants going down. Because after that, they were 6-2 or something like that. Sandy hit. And I think that just all the energy and everything came out of the team. They lost that game to the Steelers. And they declined after that and couldn't bounce back. So then you have 2013, all those years you're starting 0-2, 0-3, 0-5, 0-6, whatever the number was.
All those terrible records. Yep.
And for me, I have, my cousins and I split season tickets, and we have 4 seats. Then my seats are lower level end zone, and I have 2 sons. And part of the things I had said, back in the 2000s, I was like, when my sons get older, I can't wait to kind of go with them to the games. It was we have 4 seats. Me, my 2 sons, maybe one of them brings a friend or I bring a friend, and that's going to be it. I'm going to now pass the tradition down.
Sure.
It was pulling teeth because in their formative ages, as you know, like in 2013, 2014, when they're 10 or so years old, you know,
the
like
team's trash.
the team's trash, and I have a difficult time like convincing them to come to see this, and they have a lot more ability to go to other teams because, like, you know, they have the internet, they have social media, they have all this stuff.
Sure.
So like, you know, the hell with this, I'm a Chiefs fan, I'm a whatever fan, you know, and it's so easy, it's so much easier to do that now than it was years ago. Now, granted, like, and you know, we were talking before, like, you know, you have these pockets of, you know, New Jersey Cowboy fans from the 70s,
Sure.
Steeler fans, you know, stuff like that. Because in the 70s, the Giants were so bad, they said, the heck with this. I want to see a team that's winning.
Sure.
I'm going to root for the Steelers. I'm going to root for the Cowboys. That's why you see kind of like this group that's still kind of around. So for me, it was just sort of keeping the faith, you know, to bring my sons, to convince them to keep coming to the games. And I was like, trust me, it's worth it. I'm like, you know, I was like, you can't enjoy the wins until you've experienced the losses, which is in a concept that makes sense, but it's tough to explain.
It's a hard sell for a kid.
It's a hard sell to a kid when one of their
sell.
friends goes, the heck with this. I love Mahomes, you know, like that's much easier. So you try to teach them to go ahead and you know, persevere through the losses. So for me, the post, you know, like the post 2012 on that period up until basically last year, that's been the worst.
Okay. So we all kill Dave Gettleman a lot on the internet, at least. Mm-hmm. Fair enough. How do you feel about Jerry Reese?
Jerry Reese, I always thought that you know, he had his kind of like tendency to go with. He was like, you never have enough pass rushers, which I think, you know, makes a lot of sense. That's what it is. I like to show an old clip every now and then of a George Young interview from 1986 where he said, you build a team with a quarterback. First you you get a quarterback, and then you get a guy who gets the quarterback. Like, that was his method. Ernie Accorsi learned under George Young.
Yep.
So when Ernie Accorsi came along, he kind of like moved it through. I always thought that like Accorsi put together the structure of the team that Reese added enough of the pieces to then kind of like push him over the top with some more things. I think Reese was, you know, he was like the their you know, head of scouting and stuff like that, if I remember, for the Giants. So, you know, it's not that like, of course, he did it alone. Like, you know, Reese had a big part in that. So I thought, you know, like I said, I thought Reese did a good job in taking the Accorsi team through to kind of like, you know, to put pieces around Eli to win. But as time went along, he just like, you know, he got a little too cute in my mind. Like, he started doing things where he's like, he lost the plot, where he started drafting talented projects that were not going to pan out. Like, yeah, for every JPP he hit on, you had an Adrian Robinson, you know, the JPP of tight ends, who did nothing. J-Ron Holsey, who did nothing. That second round pick they got out of North Carolina, the defensive tackle, I'm blanking on his name. Marvin Austin. Like, you know, yeah, like he was a guy, like what Reese liked to do is he liked to project players in their junior years. And then if they had a bad senior year, he would find a reason to draft them based on their junior year and say, I'm going to get a bargain. And he kept filling the team with sort of like projects like that after a certain period of time, when your core starts getting old, the offensive line, obviously he never rebuilt properly.
No, the fact that team won that Super Bowl with that offensive line is pretty impressive.
Oh yeah, that was
even the center, David Boss, was garbage, and they somehow won a Super Bowl. No offense to David Boss, man. I don't think you'll ever see this. You just weren't really good. You were a cast off from another team.
Yep. And in that case was, you know, and this is where I think he got in trouble, was he kind of fell victim to the idea of just get to the playoffs and let Eli turn into playoff Eli.
Matt, and you and me, man, we're just here. I'm loving where you're going, because it's like 100% where I am with this.
Yep. And for him, that's why I said, for me, the difference between Parcells and Coughlin, and in a way it's not fair because it's different eras, free agency, salary caps, things like that. But what I felt was, for that, especially sort of the tail end there, when things, you know, after 2012, the Giants were content with trying to just eke out 9 wins or so, 9-10 wins, just get in the playoffs, and let Eli work his magic, you know, like he did in Green Bay and everything in San Francisco. But that left them with no margin of error for tiebreakers to get to the playoffs and things like that. And you put too much pressure to basically be like, just be good enough. The playoffs is a crapshoot. I don't want to build a team that goes 15-1. I'm content building a team that's going to go 9-7, 10-6, get a wild card, and then just go from there. So, like I think that somewhere along the line, they use the crutch of Eli's, ability to rise up in the playoffs, and they devalued what they're doing in the regular season to the point that they gave themselves no place to go. And then you lose a couple of games and all of a sudden you're out. And especially those teams back then, again, every year you're 0-2, 0-2, 0-2, and you're in a hole. And, one of the reasons why I think Dable had so much success was he got off to that fast start. That changed everything right from the beginning. Like that fast start, just, you needed to kind of like get the that losing feeling. You needed to find a way around it. And I've shown clips of Madden saying all the time, like, winning is a great deodorant. Winning is a great deodorant. Like when Dable started off 6-1 or whatever it was, the Giants jumped out to, that changed away the whole tenor of what was going on. That's why I have a lot more hope for Dable. That like I think that he and Shane are a little more along that line. That like they're not going to be content to just make the playoffs. I think they're trying to push to say, like, we want to eventually, we want to win the NFC East. We want to then, start to get like, one of those, we want to get through the top seed. Like, I think I see that path. I think the Giants fell into the trap of just let Eli bail us out. And it really, I think, kind of like helped break down a lot of where they were going.
Yeah, and I'm in 100% agreement. I would say that fourth Lombardi is like a gift and a curse almost, where the gift is who's not going to take it, right? It's a Lombardi. Of course you're going to take it. But the curse is kind of exactly what you're saying. It was a mediocre team where Eli himself individually was balling out a lot with the offense, even though the offensive line was dead last and the running game was dead last and the defense was getting torched. They still found a way. Eli was able to do what he was able to do. He makes a run, and you're saying what Jerry Reese is probably thinking. Well, if we just supplement the bare basic enough and we just sneak in, he can make another run. It's not that big of a deal. Like, we can just kind of keep going in this pattern, we'll be okay. And then the investments, the proper ones were never made. And the investments that were made, like you said, were kind of like, I think if Jerry Reese was a GM today, he'd probably have more hits than misses, simply because he's doing what people are probably doing now, finding that tweener, finding the athlete a little bit more today than the football player so much. Not fully, but just to an extent in concept. He might have a little bit more hits. But yeah, man, Jerry Reese's drafts for his last 7 or 8 were just stinkers across the board.
Yeah.
And I don't even want to talk about the first rounders. I don't get that excited about first rounders like other people do. You're supposed to be able to hit on the first rounder, man. Like, you're supposed to be able to. There's only 30 or 30 some odd, first rounders. You should be able to hit on that. So that one doesn't make me jump up and down. Oh my God, you're so great. When every other pick after that is just a flop.
Yeah, no, and people say that he ignored the offensive line. He didn't ignore the offensive line. He just took bad linemen. Like he invested first round picks in Eric Flowers. He invested in Justin Pugh, in Weston Richburg.
Justin Pugh serviceable, but they never found a spot for him. They constantly kept moving more right tackle, left tackle, guard. Moved around a ton.
And they gave big money or relatively big money to Jeff Schwartz. So like he did address it. Just these guys, whether it was injury or just they weren't very good, it just didn't pan out. So
and then to your extent, right, in the cupboard it was bare because there was no real supplementing happening. There was nobody waiting in the wings.
Right. And to your point, what makes a championship team is the late rounds is where you fill out the roster, you fill out the depth. And for me, the warning sign always was, and we knew it was like a rebuild even when Gettleman was here, but when you have your final cut down, at the end of camp, and then everyone kind of waves their players, and when the Giants were like bringing in like 7 guys off the waiver wire or whatever it was, like right before week 1, you're like, oh my God, like that's the flag that's signaling that like the team knows they have no talent and no depth and none of that stuff to work with. So, we kind of kept starting over. And I think, for a couple years there, the Giants basically were, led the league in the most waiver claims coming out, which tells you you're missing on all of your late round picks. Those guys are not panning out.
Yeah, so you're trying to supplement now somehow.
You're trying to supplement, and none of your first round picks are worth giving a second contract to. So you cannot establish a core. That's why I was so happy to see the Giants lock up Thomas and Dexter, because like you need to now establish your core. And it's been forever since they've been able to say, here's our guys that we're going to battle with these guys. They did it years back where before they hit free agency, the Giants, and I mentioned the OC story before, they locked up OC. They locked up Tuck before he hit free agency. They identified these guys before they had to worry about going through, like the whole tagging process. And Saquon is a different deal because I think that really is driven by the fact he's a running back. But overall, the Giants I'm beyond happy that with what Shane is doing, with the way the front office is kind of all working together right now. They're in lockstep with what Dable wants. They've cleaned up the cap in a lot of places. They've given themselves flexibility. And then now they're Andrew Thomas, one of the top tackles in the league. Why are we messing around? Lock him up. Dexter
and even
Lawrence,
his contract is a really good contract, man.
Oh yeah.
I thought it'd be more, but so far the thing I've loved about Shane is his contracts. I'm loving his deals. I love the Daniel Jones contract. I don't care how about you feel about the player. Remove the player, just look at the contract. It's a good contract, regardless of who the player is.
Well, the Daniel thing, and I said it at the time when he got signed, and everyone was losing their minds about the $40 million.
Sure.
And I was like,
don't worry about that.
It's don't worry about that, because look at what the $40 million is going to be by next year.
Yep.
By next year, $40 million a year, he's going to be the 12th or 13th or 14th paid quarterback.
Sure.
So are you going to tell me, if you really want to go by value and stuff, and granted, the contract the Giants gave Jones has outs in there for them to kind of reevaluate as they're moving along.
It's 2 years and out.
It's going to be 2 years and out as you're going. So can anybody really, even the biggest Daniel Jones haters out there, or people that just like to pile on Jones or pile on the Giants, can you with a straight face name 14 other quarterbacks who are really better than him? He's there. I mean, he's probably right around where, even if somebody was wanted to go against him, you could reasonably argue that he's in a place where basically, if you're saying he's a middle of the pack quarterback, and I'm doing air quotes over here,
sure,
the 14th highest paid quarterback is technically basically middle of the pack.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he's being paid what you're supposed to say, and I really, for me, I have my eyes so much, and I'm going to watch this Friday night. And you don't want to go too much into preseason. I know I've been posting preseason highlights because I love watching preseason games, especially the 80s was different because those guys, they played full games in the 80s, believe it or not. It's funny that I've watched games from the old preseason from 1988. Parcells had the first string out there in the fourth quarter of the fourth preseason game. That would be insane today. But I really want to see how JMS does. I'm hoping Evan Neal comes out through the concussion protocol and everything, because if those two guys can do their thing, I think that you can solidify enough from the guards. If Daniel Jones has time to do what he needs to do with the weapons these guys have built, and I know this is the story everyone said over and over again.
Sure.
I think between what Dable is going and Kafka are gonna put together, I keep having my own historical flashbacks, honestly, a bit to when I remember the 2000 Giants when they went to the Super Bowl, where suddenly the offense started clicking for what Fossil and Sean Payton was the offensive coordinator back then for the Giants. They dialed stuff up. They went into Philly in week 2 and just destroyed them. They beat them it was 33 to something, and they did whatever they wanted to on offense. And it was amazing watching Jimmy Johnson, who's the Eagles defense coordinator, had no answer for anything they were doing. I think back to even 2005 when Eli kind of got it going with Coughlin that second year, when Plaxico came in and these other guys were all of a sudden they're lighting up the Cardinals and the Rams, and they're putting up these big points. And we're whoa, where's this coming from? I honestly believe you can see that leap coming this year with the weapons they have, with the offensive creativity they're going to have, so long as that offensive line can hold up. If they hold up, then I really think the Giants are going to surprise a lot of people. You're going to see a lot of people shocked at the points I think they can put up.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to that because it would be a happy shock. So
Yeah.
I'm done with the years of just struggles and losing. The one thing I wanted with new coach, new regime, same thing I've been saying, I just want consistency, man. I would just like some consistency. Even if it's like a 500 consistency, start somewhere without the losing. Just get me out of the losing world for a little bit and help me build towards something and give me sustainability, like sustain something here for the long term. So I'm really, really hoping, just like you are, that JMS is going to be good enough and Neil's going to make his progression. And like I said, there's enough weapons. There's definitely enough talent there between Dayball and Kafka. There's enough mental talent there for them to get where they want to go. And Jones has more than enough talent to make it happen as well. I was having this conversation with I would say a medium Jones fan, not a hater, Giants fan. So he kind of believes like I do. If you're a Giants fan, you can't really hate somebody on the team. You're still rooting for them regardless of the player. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense, even if you don't like the player. And he said the same thing. He's like, yeah, Jones is probably like 18th, 17th. I was like, all right, cool. I've got no problem with that. I was like, can you name me that many people better than him? And he just goes through 4 or 5. I was like, let's do it one step bigger. I'll bring a list. Just open up a list of all starting quarterbacks. I was like, look, I'm just going to give you names. Just tell me if you take him over Jones or not. That's all I want to know. Today. Don't tell me from 4 years ago. Tell me literally today. Season starts today. Are you taking this guy or the other guy? He went through his list and he was only able to pick up 9 people in front of Jones. So I was like,
there you go.
He was 18th and you just picked him 10th.
Yep. There you go.
Like, I think part of it is that I don't think people realize the quality of other quarterbacks as well. So even last year when he was struggling, based off the adjustments I saw him make that I didn't think he was going to make, because he made some big adjustments that I saw last year. I had him at worst. I was like, you know what? At worst, he's probably like 12. That's probably his floor. I think his floor is probably like 12. His ceiling is probably like 7th, maybe 6th. Somewhere around there in that window, I think would be like a floor ceiling scenario, in my opinion. But a lot of things went in a good direction for him. So shout out to Dayball for correcting a lot of things. Shea Tierney as well, the quarterback coach, and just everybody involved correcting some things that clearly were destroyed by Joe Judge, Jason Garrett, whatever the previous ones individuals responsible for kind of molding, destroying his work, if you will, or his habits, if you will. So
if you want to do something like there's an exercise interesting to do, and I looked at it the other day. If you look at Josh Allen's numbers with the Bills, Josh Allen rushes for 700 or so yards each year with him. Jones did that last year, but Josh Allen had much better like passing numbers because he had better weapons, better setup, offense, like the things had built to that. If you go back and look at the numbers Allen put up a couple years ago, it is not out of the realm. I'm not saying Jones is going to exceed those or even kind of like necessarily hit that, but I think even like a notch below what Allen did, Jones has those other pieces there, or like I said, the running is already there for what he does. And I think you're going to see the Giants do a lot of similar stuff that Daboll is building very similar to what he had in Buffalo. Now he potentially has a much better tight end in Waller. He's got a better running back in Saquon. He doesn't have as good top end wide receivers as he had there, but he's now kind of got like these pieces where I went to the camp the other day and I was watching Hyatt. And
which one?
I was there Saturday, and I was there.
You were there Saturday? I was there Saturday.
I was there Saturday, and I was sitting on the side.
I was at the evening one, right? That was the 5 p.m. camp.
Yep. And I was watching Hyatt, and I was watching these guys. I'm like, they have these guys who are dangerous that they don't have, like, you know, your number one wide receiver. You know, like they don't have that top guy, but they have enough of a scheme that they have like these like little like, you know, water bugs underneath running around who are going to cause problems, you know, speed. I'm hoping Wandale. I hope they don't rush Wandale, to be honest. But if he's ready, great. But, you know, between Hyatt, between Slayton, they're going to stretch the field. Waller is a mismatch nightmare. You're going to have, you know, like I think Bellinger's going to be that cleanup guy underneath. Yeah. And that's going to open up so much stuff for Saquon. Like, I honestly think like just what they're putting together is going to be a nightmare for teams to try to really figure out how to match up. Again, got to hold up, you got to block.
Sure.
But with this creativity, that's why I say when I see the numbers Josh Allen put up, I don't think, I don't know if it's a hot take or whatever, but like, I don't think it's out of the realm to see Jones put up numbers similar, not quite to that exact, like, you know, like almost MVP numbers that Josh Allen's putting up. But I think slightly a notch below would not shock me at all for 2023 for Jones.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you. I brought up this imaginative scenario, and I'll bring it up again, right? So you've got Jones on the field, you've got Barkley in the backfield. You have Waller. You have Bellinger. Let's say it's a sub package. So you've got Slayton, Hodgins, and Hyatt, or intertwine one with Campbell if you wanted to. Between all that speed, who are you going to double?
Yep.
Somebody's going to get a clean opening, and they just have to win. And some of these guys, Waller can win. Barkley's can destroy somebody when he leaks out the backfield. If Bellinger's in the block to, let's say, help Neal and he leaks out on a chip, he's athletic enough that his 3-yard catch can easily get 7, 8, 9 yards. The whole point is just to keep moving forward, keep pressuring that defense and moving forward. So there's a lot of options out there with the additions, the main additions being of speed, right? Between Hyatt, Waller, and just Campbell alone. Just those three pieces alone of speed adds a lot.
Yep.
Adds a lot.
I mean, I love, again, I always bring it back to my, the old school stuff over here. John Madden, I actually posted this from when I took a picture of Hyatt at camp when I was there on Saturday. And I said, John Madden, in several games that I've recorded and seen, I've posted up highlights. He said the thing that kills defenses is speed at wide receiver and a running quarterback, because that destroys the integrity of a defense. So even if Hyatt is not even catching the ball or Slayton's not catching the ball, the threat of their speed to just go downfield is going to force your safeties, your secondary to now break down to try to account for that. And then underneath, everything else is going to be opened up. And you have these little fast guys who are going to be there, whether, it's going to be, again, if Wandale is available, we'll see if Shep, how Shep is doing, if he's going to make the team or not going underneath. Like, I have a feeling Cole Beasley is going to either make the team outright or he's going to be a one of those practice squad guys, because he strikes me as a guy like he wouldn't come out of his semi-retirement unless I think he's had some kind of not there's no 100% agreements, but I think it's kind of understood that there's a spot for him here, and he could be one of those guys underneath causing all these problems. But as you have the speed from Hyatt and these guys stretching the field underneath with Saquon and Waller, like, that's why I said, I think they're going to be so much of a problem for everybody. And Jones running around, if guys are now peeling off the deal that you're going to leave open, Jones can just get 5-10 yards a chunk very easily, then step out of bounds to keep things moving. Guys, I try not to be too much of a cheerleader or bullish, but I can see what's happening here. In the past I saw where oh my God, this thing's a train wreck and the Giants are not going to get we'll be lucky to get a first down. You could see the pieces coming together. And that's why I'm very curious for Friday to see how they block some of these guys in Detroit. Sure. How does, that's why number one of the preseason, I always look for injuries. I don't want injuries. I don't care if they win or lose.
Yes.
Just don't get hurt. But then beyond that, I start watching to see, are these guys holding their own against the competition? Because they're not game planning. They're not doing any of that kind of stuff. So I don't get caught up in, they're boring. They're going to run the same, play action waggle to the tight end coming across the field. Everyone runs that. There's 5 or 6 basic plays they're going to run over and over again. But I'm going to look to see, how is JMS's snaps looking coming out of the shotgun? How is he looking picking up stunts? How are they communicating back and forth? Is
a lot of it is going to be execution, right? I want to see execution right now.
Yep. So that's what I'm looking for this preseason. And again, I really hope that they just unveil everything week 1 against Dallas and just I'm going to be there at that game. I really hope
winning that game. I say it every week when it comes up. I wholeheartedly believe we beat Dallas.
I not only think they beat, I think they actually handled Dallas in that game.
I
have a weird feeling. I think they handled them.
About that. I didn't want to get that far off just because, like I said, new pieces, there's still execution. Week 1, anything's possible, right? It's almost like an extension of the preseason a little bit. But if I really sit back and I just think about it, even with Dallas's additions, I think we're both close in rosters. I take our coach over McCarthy every single day.
Well, yeah.
So the coaching, if you go the plus and minuses about where you're winning, per se, and being a home game, I can see a 28-20 type game, maybe 31, maybe. But I can see a game where, for me, I still have them winning. I'm not sure how it's going to happen, but I see us winning.
I just have a feeling I go back again. Whenever I watch the Giants, I go back, my mind ticks back to history. And I think back previous scenarios like this. And I'm not saying this team is the 1990 Giants.
Sure.
They're not. That team had the pedigree of, Super Bowls and all other stuff. But they faced Philly week 1 and they basically jumped all over them. And that game really honestly was a 27-10 win. The final score was 27-20. but Philly got some like garbage time
Sure.
scores. The Giants took it to them. And that was everything that there was so much like just everyone like, Philly had kept beating the Giants, and it was like that cathartic moment. For me, I liken what's going to happen with Dallas to that moment, and I really hope Zach Martin continues to hold out. That would make it much better. But I just really think the Giants are just going to unveil it over here. That's why I'm like knocking on all kinds of wood here that they stay healthy through preseason, because I really think they're gonna take it to them that first game.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, even through training camp, like you said, knock on wood, the worst thing so far has been a somewhat of a torn tricep for Ryder Anderson. I don't know how long that's going to be, but he's going to quote unquote play through it. And then you have Evan Neal's concussion. That's been it. That's a big deal for us when in training camp people get
the backup
right.
The backup center got hurt too, but I don't think he
sorry.
was or JR or whatever.
You are
but
correct. The guy they Hassan something.
That
You are correct. Sorry, my fault. That is right. There is some depth thing, but I mean, at this stage for us, we were losing people left and right every summer. It wasn't
hamstrings and stuff like that.
Guys, ACL, knee. The fact that we've been relatively healthy kind of makes me nervous because now I'm waiting for the drop.
That's what like a true Giant fan. We wait for the bad news. Yeah,
of course, man. It's just it's PTSD at this point. It's been, you don't know unless you've been a Giants fan how rough it's been on so many angles. Like you can't catch a break. Last year was the first time forever where you felt like you were catching a break, like it was actually going in your direction for once.
Yep.
How did you feel about the draft? What were your thoughts?
I was actually happy with it because it all made sense to me, and well, even I looked at it, I not that I knew anything. My prediction before it was they were going to draft Banks because I wanted a corner, and where they were sitting, I knew they were talking wide receiver and the BC guy who went to Baltimore.
Sure.
But for me, corner was the screaming need on the team, and it was one of those situations where need met best player available for them, and I was kind of thrilled that I was for JMS I wanted a center, and he was one where I'm looking, he's not quite a first rounder, but it was, I think like a lot of people said the same thing, like if he's in the second round, jump all over him. Sure. So again, need met, best player available, so that worked out. I remember watching Hyatt destroy Alabama, everyone did when he was at Tennessee. And he's one of those guys that I was watching. And then as the draft was moving along, I'm like, wait a minute, he's still kind of there. And you wonder, and then being aggressive to trade up, because I always knew, and this is what I loved about what Shane does, is Shane is now more of a modern GM. And I'm saying that he will wheel and deal. I love watching those Giant Life videos where they're showing behind the scenes.
The background on the background. Love it.
The war room where
you know what I said? They can take out Hard Knocks and do 30-minute episodes like that on every team, and you've got your summer covered.
Oh yeah. And you saw Shane wheeling and dealing. He's calling these other GMs like, yo, what's going on? And Dable's texting, whatever, whoever it was, McVay or whatever it was. The Ram McVay. And
McVay.
These are things that I hearken back to the George Young days. George Young, you almost put a gun to his head to get him to trade out of his position. He wouldn't move. That's why the whole infamous thing with Phil Simms, when Phil Simms was drafted as early as he was, they said to him, well, Phil Simms is rated as a late first-round pick. And Young's answer was, well, I didn't have a late first-round pick. I had an early first-round pick, so I took him there, which, yes, but you could have also traded down. Now, to be fair to Young, probably if we go back historically, the 49ers would have taken Phil Simms, which they would have taken Phil Simms and not taken Joe Montana later. That's right. A whole other story. But back to your question for the draft, I'm thrilled because every pick the Giants made sense. Even the second, the day 3 picks, all the guys are building depth. You're going to need that running back with getting Gray in there. You're going to need to have the depth in the secondary that they brought in. So they're making what I would consider to be smart picks. Now I'm someone that also realizes that it's the job of these scouts. They're on the road 200 something days a year doing this stuff. I'll watch everyone else these draft write-ups and the draft nicks talking about prospects, but I think that Shane and the front office they have put enough people in that you feel confident that they actually have a plan. that they know what they want to do, and building the team, for now and into the future to keep them flexible. You see that's what they're doing. So we'll see how these guys play. There's been other drafts that I've been thrilled about that didn't turn out good once they start playing on the field. There's other drafts that I didn't. I remember the 2005 draft. The Giants had like 4 players because they traded all the Eli picks.
There were hits,
and you got Tuck, you got Webster, you got Jacobs. These guys all became almost like Ring of Honor guys. That's amazing. But at the time the draft happened, I'm like, Tucky blew his ACL over at Notre Dame. Like, I don't know, maybe he'll be a backup tackle. I don't know. And okay, you brought in Brandon Jacobs because at the time Tiki was struggling at the goal line, so we need a big goal line back. So fine, he's a touchdown vulture. And Webster, okay, Sam Madison, he's old, so we need some young blood in here.
Yep.
So I'm like, those all make sense. It didn't excite me, but I'm like, fine, whatever. And that turned out to be one of the greatest drafts in team history.
Yep.
So we'll see what happens when the product hits the field, but I'm very encouraged.
Yeah. Do you have who's your favorite all-time Giants player?
I mean, the cop out is easy as LT.
Sure.
Because I saw him. I saw him in action. I saw him in person. I saw him in the games again. Like I mentioned before, the season tickets have been in my family since the 50s, Yankee Stadium, that whole thing. I started actually going to games in my family seats in 1987. So right after because I actually wanted to go to like the playoff games and stuff like that in 86. But you have to remember, my family are the ones, they sat through the 70s wilderness years. They were there when you had the fumble with Herman Edwards. Like they were, they saw that stuff. So, they paid their dues. And as much as I wanted to, go sit in there too, they're like, no, you're not coming. You're not coming to the championship game against the Redskins. So I went the next year, but that's when I saw LT in person doing his thing. He was, and I try to convey it with the clips I show to people because everyone talks about who he is. I like that sometimes I show the raw footage of like what he did so people can see it in like the actual broadcast that those of us who watched him live, 30, 35, 40 years ago can see what it's about. So for me, it's LT. When he would come out of the tunnel in the pregame announcements, the place would go berserk. So for me, it's LT.
That's fair enough. Has there ever been a player where you're just like, why are you on my team? Please get off my team. And who was that player? I'm sure there's actually been a lot, to be honest with you. But who is the one player where you're like, I just need this guy not here?
Oh, that's a good question.
I'll tell you my current one while you think about it. There's probably 2 players currently where I'm like, I just don't understand why you're still here. One of them is definitely O'Shane Ximines. I don't understand why you're here. And the second one is Darnay Holmes. I don't understand why you're here. Now with Darnay, you're on the 4th year of a contract. It expires anyway. I can rationalize it. Fine. Yeah. Okay. It's the last year of a contract. Why catch it? O'Shane, I don't understand that. I think one of the biggest needs we still have that's a glaring weakness for me is there's no third pass rusher, and that's what keeps me up at night right now. There's no third pass rusher, and I feel like that's going to be a problem. And I can't put all my eggs in the O'Shane 5th-year basket where he hasn't figured it out, or Tomlin Fox, who UDFA's barely gotten any burn, right? Who am I putting my stock in for the third pass rusher? I don't know, but those are probably the 2 guys right now where I'm like, why are you here?
For me, I'd say an easy one to call out is Eli Apple.
Yes.
I remember, and I was at the draft when he was drafted. One of the things that was said about him was they go, he doesn't know how to cook his own food. I think it was like the thing that Scout wrote.
Correct.
And at the time the joke was, hey, he's a first round pick. He can hire his own chef. But the real reason that was said was he was super immature, and like, yes, we know his mother is very active in social media and battling with people and stuff like that. But beyond that, there was just this level of immaturity with Apple. And his rookie year, he was actually good. Like if you go back and watch his rookie year, like in 2016, he had a strong season for the Giants. And they had DRC, they moved him to the slot, and that defense was, I'm so annoyed at that playoff game in Green Bay because if Odell's dropping the passes and stuff, Eli was on fire. Like if the Giants actually didn't just get field goals instead of touchdowns, I think they would have beat Green Bay in that wild card.
Yeah.
Things fell apart later on. The DRC got hurt, but the next year with Apple, I don't know what that was with him. And I know his mother got sick and stuff like that, but beyond that, he just was unprofessional. And Landon Collins called him a cancer, and I went to the Ram game, that disaster where and I'll say this, I in 1990 the Giants played the Cardinals, and I was
while they were still in the same division.
Well, still in the same division, yep, because there's the Phoenix Cardinals, former St. Louis, they were still NFC East. The Giants were much better team, but they were struggling in that game, and I was at the time, I guess, a spoiled 15, 16-year-old Giant fan, and the Giants were trailing 19-10. My seats are low level end zone, and I was just complaining to my father the whole game. I'm like, oh, I hate this game. This is terrible. And then my dad finally is like, do you want to go? Like, I'm getting sick of hearing you. Like, you want to go? So I'm like, yeah, let's get out of here. I can't stand they're going to lose this game. And I left, and we left. On the way back, as we're going down the old Giant Stadium spirals, if you remember those things, I hear the crowd roar, and that was like the Stephen Baker touchdown to make it 1917. And my father looked at me, like, still want to go? I'm like, yeah, I made up my mind.
Yeah.
We're in the car ride home when we hear Barr get the field goal to win it with no time, and the Giants won that game 20-19. And my father said to me driving home, well, you did this to yourself because he goes, I was going to stay there. He goes, you just missed seeing an amazing moment.
Sure.
Because you were like spoiled, whatever. You couldn't handle it. And I learned my lesson that day, and I stayed at every game except that 2017 whatever game against the Rams, when the Rams killed the Giants, and there was like a 3rd and 30 whatever 33 or something, and it was like a screen pass, I think to Robert Woods or something like that.
Yeah, I believe it was Robert Woods.
And Woods just went straight up the field for a touchdown, and I think Eli Apple just watched him run by. And among everyone else,
because that clip that you're referring to was all over because it was called out. People were calling out Eli Apple.
Yep.
Yeah, they were calling him out for that play, even on ESPN before. Not even Giants. I mean, just generally that was getting called out.
Yep, that lack of effort. That's what kills me, is that lack of effort and seeing that. And at the time, I took my son and a couple of his young friends, and if you remember, that weather was it was a crappy day. It was misting and raining and cold. I left that game in the 3rd quarter because I felt like it was almost like child abuse to keep my son and his friends there.
Sure.
But I said to them, like, these guys don't care on that field. Why should I care sitting here in the stands? So I left. And that's the first game I left before it was over since 1990, because I left because I was being a stubborn, spoiled Giant fan.
And you were being
I was a teenager. I didn't know any better. But
a teenager, right? You're committed. I'm stuck on this. I'm out, man. So we get it.
Yep. But what's funny is I told my sons that story about me leaving, because I'm trying to impart that to them. So my son looked at me, he goes, wait a minute, we're leaving? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, here's the difference. I'm like, those guys don't care. And I was like, if they don't care, you can see it over here. I'm like, I'm not sitting out here for this. So that game. So yeah, for me, it's Eli Apple. I saw from the chat, Mark over here said Eric Flowers. Yeah, he's another one. Eric Flowers, he looked like he just wasn't interested in working. And, Bobby Hart was another guy. He called himself the best right tackle in football, and he didn't do that. And I have one more total random one for you. And this is for the diehards, because I love, if you notice my Twitters, I say, here's a deep cut, and I'll find some weird thing of a guy who played one play for the Giants, and I'll find that highlight and show it. Jeremy Lincoln. Jeremy Lincoln was a backup cornerback in the late 90s for the Giants. And I went to the season opener. They played Washington, the home opener in 99 against Washington. Washington hung 50 on the Giants in that game. Oof. And Jeremy Lincoln, I think, allowed 10 or 12 completed passes against him and a couple of touchdowns. And he couldn't cover me that day. And, the fans were losing their mind, just booing him every time. Then finally, Fossil just benched him, after halftime. Yeah. And the running joke was Jeremy Lincoln, just get him out of here. So for me, it was of all random people, it was Jeremy Lincoln being god awful on the home opener as Washington hung 50 on the Giants.
That's fair. That's fair. Two more, and I'll let you go because I'm sure you have a life too. One is remove the big names. Don't give me the Daniel Jones, the Barkley. Don't give me the big names that you know are the stars. Who is the player your eyes are most focused on this season? Who's the guy you're looking at for not necessarily a breakout, but to have a good year? But that's who you're focused on. Who's not obviously the standard names.
For me, the two guys, and it's I always go back to defense, and this is again being raised back at the Big Blue Wrecking Crew and that
Fully
stuff.
understandable.
You know, with it like, and you know he's still a fairly big name. It's Ojulari. It's Aziz. Yep. I think that if he can stay healthy, and I listened to Banks's the Banks and Papa podcast back where Banks said he's like 15 sacks or whatever it was.
Right? Yeah, if he stays healthy, he's got the ability for 15.
He is the one guy, I think, even more than Thibodeau, that he is the guy who I think can wreck things in the backfield and just create havoc as a pass rusher. Because one of the things that I loved was, again, the interaction I get from players. And Jumbo Elliott, who follows me on Twitter, is great. Like, he's so fun. Like, he chimes in with all their stuff. And I remember posting something. This is when Thibodeau and Aziz were both out last year. And the Giants didn't have a pass rush. And I remember like just sort of complaining about the fact that like, you know, you have, you know, like all we got is like defensive tackles over here trying to rush, you know. Then Nick Williams, I think was like a defensive end for the Giants last year for a while.
Sure.
And I'm like, they got a bunch of bull rushers. And Jumbo responded to that post and he said, those two big guys you have in the middle, and he's referring to Leo and Dexter. He goes, yep. Those guys are going to push the pocket. He said, once you get your edge rushers, he goes, quarterbacks are going to have nowhere to go. They're going to roll right into that pass rush.
That's correct.
And Thibodeau was, again, coming along slow off the knee injury. I think it took him a while to kind of like feel comfortable out there. You saw him really start to emerge, especially the Commanders game. You saw him emerge.
Yeah.
But for me, it's Ojulari. Because if Ojulari can do his thing and wreck, you cannot double team him. Because otherwise you're going to leave either Dexter or Leo single blocked in the middle, and they're just going to shove whoever that guy is into the quarterback's lap.
Yeah, so we've already seen Dexter Lawrence defeat two people. Remember that Colts one? You know, I mean, the guard and the center to get through regardless.
Yeah, that was Quentin Nelson. The guy's like a Hall of Famer, and he's bull rushing him into him. So when I see that, like for me, it's Ojulari, because again, a pass rush is really gonna separate the stuff, because I still don't know what to make of the coverage yet. I think Banks could be okay, but again, he's a rookie corner. Rookie corner is always
that's tough.
And people say it like, don't compare to Sauce Gardner or anything like that, because Sauce Gardner was not the norm for a rookie corner.
Yeah, we always compare the exceptions versus the rules, and we assume the exception is the rule, and it never is. Yep.
So you need that pass rush. So for me, Aziz is the first one. The second one, and again, this goes back to a comment that I had when Carl Banks responded to one of the posts that I put out there. It's Okereke. And when I asked Carl Banks, because for me, what I was fixated on, sitting in the crowd, when I sat in the stands, I was in the stands that horrible game against the Eagles in December in the rain when the Giants were getting killed. And the Eagles were running up and down the field and yucking it up. The first one, and I had Eagle fans all around me, and that was a nightmare. For me, like, you got to stop the run. If they don't stop the run against Dallas and Philly, they're not going to beat them. So getting Ashawn Robinson, getting Nacho to then give Dexter and Leo rest that they need, so that way you can maintain
without significant play drop off. Right, that's the big thing, is a significant play drop off.
Exactly, significant play drop off. So that way you have the depth. They'll hold the edge. They're going to hold that line out. What Banks said to me was, you need better linebacker play, because you need a linebacker who's gonna basically rush in there and make tackles in the backfield, cut off angles. Jalen Smith, bless his heart, he didn't have it anymore. He tried.
But he was always chasing from behind, right? That was the thing.
Chasing behind, step slow, but that's the deal. So you now have these big bodies in front who are going to occupy blockers. They're going to let the linebacker come clean. The problem was they had them last year. They didn't have the depth beyond, but then they didn't have the athleticism at linebacker to do anything about it. Like they didn't bring anything. Okereke has that depth. It has that speed, I think, to go and make tackle sideline to sideline. So he by himself working with this defense line in front of him, if I had to have like, a number you're looking at, like, I would not at all be shocked if by the end of the year you see Okereke is up there with like 130, 140 tackles when this whole thing is said and done, because he's not going to come off the field. He is going to be that piece the Giants haven't had since like before Blake Martinez blew his knee, a couple of years back.
The only name to go to is Antonio Pierce, because that's the last legit linebacker you had.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think, and I think that's a great example, is Pierce is that kind of guy. Pierce is the one who came in and he had those studs in front of him. And before that, the Giants had guys like Nick Greason and like they didn't really have, Michael Barrows at the end of his career. Like they didn't have the athleticism. You saw the drop off.
Oh, they signed what's his name and he blew his knee out.
Oh, Bear Green.
LeVar Arrington, remember
that?
Oh,
yeah. LeVar Arrington.
But he blew his knee out.
His Achilles, yeah. He did it against Dallas. He, I think, is going to be that guy the Giants haven't had. And, I'll give you a third that I'm looking for, obviously, it's McKinney. Because McKinney was
big year for him.
Coming he was breaking out in 2021. I think that he was trying to find, and I'm not smart enough to know the intricacies, whatever, of Wink's defense over here, but I think he kind of struggled in what Wink was trying to do out there and figure out his way. And I think just as he got comfortable is when he had the RV accident, and then and then that kind of set him all back.
Sure,
he's in a contract year.
It's always a big deal.
He's got this stuff. He now has this talent all in front of him. I'm looking now at the fact the Giants have 3 levels to work with on defense. If he can become now that third level as that center fielder out there, that's making plays, that is, we saw him, make basically the winning tackle in Minnesota.
Yep.
He's that guy that
not only Minnesota, he was also a part of that one in Jacksonville, that goal line one. He was also in that mix as well with Landon Collins for the
at the goal line. Yeah.
Jacksonville. Yeah, McKinney was in there. He was in that play.
Fabian Moreau of all people who jumped. He's the one who started all that. Yeah, but that's what I see. So for me, it really it's really Aziz and Okereke that I'm really looking to. If they play well, they'll take this thing the next step.
And I'll throw in addition too, because I'm just a fan so far. And again, he hasn't played any NFL snaps per se, but I'll even throw Darian Beavers in there. I loved what I was watching with Beavers last season in training camp. I was actually at that preseason game against the Bengals where he got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
But I loved how he was flying around. He's so much bigger than you anticipate. And you've seen him, right? Because obviously so he's huge. I mean, the guy's like 6'4", 260. And between him and Okereke, that is some hard hitters that hopefully are going to change some of this dynamic you're talking about getting that run defense in play.
Yeah, he's almost like the old school giant linebacker when they would have these guys that were 6'3", 6'4", 250, like a Pepper Johnson, kind of like size, I really hope he's back from an ACL, and I'm curious to see how he does tomorrow or on Friday.
I need him to get these snaps under his legs, because to me he's just starting inside linebacker, your other one, I should say.
Yep, because I worry, the assumption always is that these guys bounce back from ACLs, but we saw it with Ryan Connolly, I guess, as the linebacker a few years ago, that
5th rounder.
He was looking good. Then he tore his ACL. He didn't come back. Blake Martinez. Now, granted, Blake Martinez is older. He never came back. From that. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I just want to see it. I want to see that explosiveness this preseason. And he's a great one that I should have said earlier on, like what I'm looking for this preseason. He's a big one that I want to see, because if we can find that guy next to Okereke,
oh man, then you just kind of feel good.
Yep. And there's a veteran they just mentioned,
Anthony Barr.
Barr that they're looking at. So
apparently they're not looking at him now. So the reports are a little bit conflicting. The report yesterday was, but I forgot who it was. I have to go back to my Twitter. But it was said that Shane was not going to have the visit. They didn't want to give the young guys a look. So I don't know how credible that was, but I'll look into it. But I think the Anthony Barr thing isn't happening now.
Okay. Well, here's my curiosity then. If Anthony Barr shows up next week,
Sure.
that tells you that they didn't like what they saw on Friday.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
So, yep.
100%. They either didn't like what they saw out of Beavers or they didn't like what they saw to McFadden. But in that room, they didn't like something.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, 100%. All right, one more and I'll let you go. This is probably a tough one because you got, like you said, you got years of experience. So, favorite Giants memory, and you
There's
can rattle off a couple. Most people do. It's okay.
yeah, I mean, like, for me, it's still the first Super Bowl. It's 86, in Pasadena against Denver, Super Bowl 21. Again, at the time I was 12 years old, so I didn't have the full understanding, but watching my cousins, my father, my uncles and stuff, like, lose their minds because, like, they're like, you don't understand, like, we never thought we would see this, and you see the old, like, NFL films clips and stuff where, they can't believe it. And that's why one of the reasons why I show the clips the way I show them, like, almost like, sequentially and in context and from the original broadcasts when I post the highlights on Twitter, I try to remember to evoke, the feel for people who never saw it, who weren't alive to see it, to understand what, these, people are talking about, these old Giant fans are talking about, to understand where it's coming from, but also for the older Giant fans to bring that, like, nostalgia back so you could see it. So for me, it's 86 because that first one. I still have stuff, and every now and then I'll even post stuff on the Twitter account of, like, old hats and shirts and mugs and stuff that I find around it, that I'll show. So a lot of the stuff is 86. Obviously for me also, 2007. And here's my memory from that is I went to the final game against the Patriots, and they're going for the undefeated season.
Sure.
And, I mentioned I went to Boston College, so I'm quite familiar with the New England Boston accent. And I had a group of fans who came down from Boston sitting right behind me in that game, the whole game. And they were just, like, screaming at Eli and they're like, welcome to the Wildcat and stuff like that, because the Giants are the Wildcat, and enjoy the Wildcat. And I just kind of kept turning around looking at them like, oh, and for a while I'm like, oh, the Giants are going to screw them. Like, this is great. They're going to ruin their perfect season.
Yeah.
And especially as, like, at the end of the game, like, Moss caught the long touchdown, and then the Patriots eventually won. Just those guys, like, just the reaction I got from them, and I stayed for the very end, and they were like, I'm not confrontational at the games. I'm pretty quiet. Sure. I cheer for the team. I don't do anything, but, like, inside I'm building all this stuff up.
Of course.
And as I'm leaving, they're pointing at me and their friends and all stuff, saying, goodbye. And all I could think of was when Plaxico caught that touchdown. And at the end, when Brady's Hail Mary was tipped away by, like, Jabril Wilson,
yep,
how miserable those guys were and had to have been, like, that just brings me so much joy to think about. So I think that I say those two Super Bowls, kind of really did it. And like I said, I hate to shortchange 1990, because 1990, that stretch was just crazy. To go from Barr kicking a field goal with the gun to beat the 49ers and ruin the three-peat. And there was no bye week in 1990. They went straight from San Francisco flying cross country to go to Tampa to playing the Bills the very next week in Buffalo. They didn't have that, in between week of nothing, to then Norwood going wide right 47 yards the next week. Like, just the emotions back and forth. And the one last story I'll tell about that, which is kind of funny, was, I was in high school in 90, and so it's late January, and that's when we were taking midterms. And I had a math midterm on the Monday after the Super Bowl, and I was known in the school, believe it or not, you can tell now, as a crazy Giant fan. Like, everything, Giant stuff. Everyone knew this, back at school when I was there. And me and a couple other guys, huge Giant fans, and my I forget what it was, calculus, whatever class it was. We had the midterm in. The teacher, still remember his name, Mr. Merkling, asked me and a couple of the guys, he goes, this is the Friday before. He goes, all right, guys, he goes, can you guys come see me after class? And everyone leaves, we go see him. And Mr. Merkling, a huge Giant fan, he knew this. He goes, all right, I'm going to make a deal with you guys, because I know there's no way you guys are studying with the Super Bowl coming on. So I want you to come to class on Monday for the exam. I'm going to hand you blank pieces of paper. You are going to pretend to take the tests for the stuff, but you are not going to ask anybody else what's on the test. On Tuesday afterwards, you're going to come either in the morning or after class, after school, and then I'll let you take the final. But I will do this because you're Giant fans, because I know you won't watch it, and I'm watching the Giant game, so I'm going to let you guys do this in behalf. He goes, this is like, a handshake agreement. You are not going to cheat and ask what's on the test.
Sure.
And I'll do this. So I remember we agreed to it. So he's handing out the test that time. He looks at us, gives eye contact. He puts the piece of paper down, has it turned over. It's completely blank.
Sure.
And for me and 3 other guys, basically were given blank tests that were nothing. And we were just sort of just still coming down from the Super Bowl glory of Norwood missing. And then the next day took the test. So that's my
sounds like that's one of the greatest teachers of all time. Shout out to whoever that was.
Yeah, Mr. Merkling from Riverdale High School. He was an awesome, huge Giant fan. And I still remember
the GOAT teacher right there. That's amazing.
33 years ago, I still remember it.
I would too. All right, Matt, appreciate you being on here, man. Loved all the stories, especially the insight. The insight kind of bridges the gap where you've been able to provide insight from different eras and decades that I haven't been able to converse with so many people so far. So I appreciate getting that differentiation. So that's always great. And I love what you do. Obviously, if you're not following Matt already, it's BigBlueVCR on Twitter. Enjoy the clips. It's just fun. Just have a good time with it. It's just great from nostalgia to even recent. He's not doing all 60 stuff. Yeah. Get plenty of recent stuff and great videos. So definitely give him a follow. And if you have anything else going on, Matt, that you want to plug, just share it, man. Feel free where to find you.
Yeah, no, they're just I'm pretty low, low maintenance just on Twitter. Again, this is basically a passion project. One thing that I enjoy is I do this to kind of keep myself entertained, and everyone seems to like it, and it's getting a lot of good. I love hearing from fans who reach out and say, I remember watching this with my dad or my grandfather at this game, and brings up memories. And I had one of my followers just the other day reach out to me, and he said that I think his father passed away, and in the last few moments before, weeks leading up to it, he was sharing my highlights to him and would kind of perk him up. So again, Giants are family, and that if I can just do some small part to kind of help spur some nostalgic feeling or remember something like that, an old memory or a highlight that helps somebody pick up their day, then I'm thrilled to kind of get that kind of reaction, and I'm hoping it continues.
Yeah, that's amazing. Keep doing what you're doing, man, because I'm definitely doing it. I want to thank everybody else who was here. Appreciate it, and hope you can tune in next week for the next episode. But for today, we want to thank Matt for his time and his insight. Matt, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Great. Thanks, Zain. This was great. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Have a good night.